Good morning.
You are the UUs who are here come rain or shine. Congratulations. So this month we've been talking around the theme of welcoming in all of its different permutations at various different levels. We talked first about welcoming all of the parts of ourself, welcoming inward. We talked about being welcoming to the individuals around us with the concept of the welcoming table. And sort of the next obvious step outward is to talk about being welcoming to groups of people, of communities, being welcoming to other communities. After the service today, we're going to screen the film Welcome to Shelbyville here in the sanctuary, which deals with a small town in Tennessee that undergoes very rapid cultural and demographic changes. And it begins as a small Tennessee town, majority white, with an African-American minority population. And they go through all the struggles of the Jim Crow era and the segregation era and the civil rights era in the 1960s. And then they experience the immigration of large numbers of Hispanic people in the 1990s. And then in the 2000s, they have to grapple with the settlement of hundreds of Somali refugees who come from a vastly different culture and also practice a different faith, the faith of Islam. So the film is sort of a very close, on-the-ground examination of the kinds of fears that these people have, the kinds of challenges that they have, and how they try to come to a better understanding of one another and what that means for them to live together. So we're having a bit of a shorter service today, at least that's my intention, to accommodate the film screening. So if you leave today thinking, did that seem a little short? Yeah, it's not an accident. It was maybe a little shorter today. And I hope everyone who was able to stay for the film will stay for the film, because it deals with issues which are very pertinent to understanding the last 40 years or so of the American experience. And these issues are only going to become more pressing as time passes. This kind of rapid demographic change, cultural change that the film deals with will be the story of our American future. It's a story that begins really in 1965 with the passage of the Immigration and Nationality Act. And what happened in 1965 was a radical break with previous policy, which led to really profound demographic changes in America. The previous immigration policies were sort of simple and super racist in their explicit quotas for what were then perceived to be desirable groups of people, right? Starting mostly with Europeans stacked in various levels of desirability, and then everyone else in the world in rapidly descending order. And it was horrifying, and President Kennedy called that system an embarrassment, and he vowed that he would do away with it. So in 1965, they did do away with it, and the Post-1965 System aimed at removing the embarrassing racial quotas that drove immigration at the time. But at the same time, it was sold to a very skeptical American public on the promise that really, you know what guys, nothing is really going to change. Don't sweat this, nothing is going to change. The law was focused on bringing in necessary skilled workers and bringing in the relatives of people who were already here. Those were the new drivers of immigration. So the reassuring argument was that presumably relatives of people already here would look like people already here, so no change there. And necessary skilled workers equaled white people. So the law was designed to hit this sort of political sweet spot where we all got to feel better about ourselves without anything actually changing. But as it turns out, nobody in 1965 anticipated the emergence of non-European doctors, engineers, computer professionals, financial professionals, and the like, and they were now able to immigrate in force to the United States. And the preference in bringing in relatives created a phenomenon called chain immigration, where entire families resettle overseas following one original immigrant. And there's a lot of reasons why it's desirable to do that, why it's valuable to have people move as families and as communities of families, but it definitely accelerates demographic change. So that's what happened. Since the law passed in 1965, The number of first-generation immigrants in the U.S. has quadrupled, going from about 10 million to about 40 million. By the 1990s, America's population growth was one-third driven by immigration. As immigration increased, the percentage of non-Hispanic white people in America declined, going from about 75% in 1990 to 70% in 2000 to currently about 64%. So that's a very fast change indeed, and the future will be more of the same. The UN projects about 1 million people a year will immigrate from the developing world to America over the next several decades. Okay, so that's a lot of numbers, and I like numbers, so I'm going to throw just a few more in you. If you like numbers too, this is your lucky day. If not so much, I promise I'll keep this pretty brief. But this is data that comes from the Census Bureau. Right now, there are a little over 300 million Americans, about 380, something like that. And about 195 million of these Americans are non-Hispanic white people. About 50 million are Hispanic people. 35 million African Americans, 15 million Asian Americans, and about 2 million Native Americans. About 7 million people report themselves as belonging to 2 or more races. Now by 2050, there will be about 400 million Americans, 300 to 400, and the population will look like this. About 185 million white people, so actually 10 million fewer white people, about 110 million Hispanic people, 50 million African Americans, 30 million Asian Americans, and about 3 million Native Americans. And the number of people identifying with 2 or more races is expected to jump by about 10 million, going from about 6 million to 16 million. So, by 2050, the projection is non-Hispanic white people will be in the minority. 1 in 2 babies born in 2050 will be Hispanic. And that is huge, fast change. And it's actually already becoming the face of the American megalopolis, the big cities. White people today are a minority in half of America's largest 100 cities. So it's already the face of America in our biggest cities. And I would submit this rapid demographic change is a great thing for our country. It won't come without stresses and strains and challenges and frictions, but it is a good thing. So, first of all, immigration is good for us socially. According to 2 professors from Harvard and UPenn writing in the New York Times, in the regions where immigrants have settled in the past 2 decades, crime has gone down, cities have grown, poor urban neighborhoods have been rebuilt, and small towns that were once on life support are springing back. Immigration is good for us economically. The economic case for immigration is pretty solid. It's keeping our population numbers from going into decline, which is a problem that is currently bedeviling Europe and Japan. It's keeping our population relatively young, which we're going to need as the sort of vast numbers of baby boomers we retire and age. We need a lot of young workers to care for them. And immigrants are highly entrepreneurial. They start more than their proportion of small businesses, and they not infrequently hit the economic goal right out of the park. 40% of Fortune 500 companies were started by immigrants or their children, including names like Kraft, Google, Yahoo, eBay. According to the Atlantic Monthly, foreign-born founders and entrepreneurs start anywhere between 1/3 to 1/2 of Silicon Valley high-tech startups. So, immigration is good for us economically. Of course, anytime you have rapid economic change, and you'll see that in the film Welcome to Shelbyville, there will be some people dislocated by that change, which is a concern. The solution, I would suggest, is to develop sane and humane policies for helping and dealing with people who are dislocated by economic change, rather than trying to just stop the change by, for example, keeping immigrants out. In general, studies show immigrants do not displace existing workers. In general, they complement them, cause economic growth, which actually leads to more jobs for everyone. And finally, immigration is good for us culturally. And I think this may actually be the biggest boon for us as a society as we go through these very rapid demographic changes. A culture needs a healthy influx of new perspectives and new priorities to shake it up, to jog it, to rethink itself. A culture needs new forms of art and music to reinvigorate its spirit. The Harvard sociologist Mary Waters, writing about the second-generation immigrant experience, notes that in the mid-20th century, New York became one of the world's leading centers of cultural creativity. We don't think it's coincidental that this intensely creative period in American music, art, letters, theater, intellectual life, and criticism coincided with a previous second generation of immigrants coming of age. Immigrants and their children, she continues, became a hothouse for intellectual scenes and cultural movements, both mainstream and avant-garde. And we need that. Right now there's a need, I think, for a really dramatic rethinking of how we do lots of things here in America. Things like work, medicine, food production, healthcare, how we care for our workers, how we care for our families, how we care for our elderly, how we care for our bodies, our environment. All of these things are deeply rooted in cultural practices, and they're all a little bit messed up the way we do them right now. So we need a lot of creative thinking to get us out of that rut and to explore new avenues and new possibilities. Now, Professor Waters, summing up her research, noted the ability of recent second-generation immigrants to navigate two cultural worlds without feeling the pressure to fully accept or fully reject either one. And that is a newer thing. In the past, children of immigrants who have to sort of deal with the anxiety of living in between two different worlds, which is not easy. In the past, they might have responded by rejecting their parents' culture and adopting a sort of exaggerated Americanness, or going in the other direction and isolating themselves in ethnic enclaves and rejecting American culture. But Waters reports that today, perhaps because of the ethos of multiculturalism, most of the young people we spoke with believe they can pick and choose which aspects of which cultural model to adopt. In other words, they acculturate selectively. And she quotes a young Colombian woman who says, "I think I have benefited from being Colombian, from being Hispanic, because it's the best of two worlds." You know that expression? It's like being able to still keep and appreciate those things in my culture that I enjoy and that I think are beautiful, and at the same time being able to change those things which I think are bad. And that's the kind of creative remixing and reshuffling of cultures and ideas that we need and that we are going to need. So we're poised to benefit in all these ways, socially and economically and culturally, from all the changes that are going on and will be going on in America. But rapid social change, even if it's healthy, even if it's creative and productive and ultimately liberating, doesn't always feel safe, and it brings its own sets of challenges. The title of this sermon is Many Strands in the Braid. And I like that image because I like the idea of many beautiful individual threads coming together to form a braid that is richer, more colorful, and ultimately stronger and more able to bear weight than the individual threads that comprise it. That's the goal, and it's something that we're historically pretty good at in America. We have our famous civic religion that ultimately brings diverse people together and unites them in a way that allows us to have diversity within unity. We're pretty good at creating that as a nation, and we should be optimistic that we will continue to do so. But that image of a multi-colored braid, of a multi-stranded braid, it also, to me, evokes a lot of deliberateness, right? I mean, we intentionally weave a braid. We follow a pattern. There's order. Everything goes in its place as we do it. And so the image has a lot of implied stability, a lot of implied order. It's maybe a little bit comforting in that way. Everything goes in its place. But I don't know if the next 50 years are going to feel like that when we deal with so much change so quickly. Like deliberate and stable and intentional, like we all know what we're doing, like we're all weaving something together. I wonder if at times it's going to feel a little bit more like the poem we read for our first reading, This Room by Imtiaz Darker, who was herself a child of Pakistani parents who immigrated to Scotland when she was an infant. And she wrote, "This room is breaking out of itself, cracking through its own walls in search of space, light, empty air. Chairs are rising up to crash through clouds." So the image suggests liberation and hope and freedom, but also if your house is coming apart around you, there might be a little anxiety, right? I mean, the image also evokes a tornado. And if the chairs are lifting off the ground, the temptation might be to find something solid to hold on to and find something reliable to cling to. And we know what that looks like when people start clinging to whatever they think of as Americanism, when they want to defend themselves against whatever foreign sort of cultural boogeyman is banging around in their attic, and it doesn't look pretty when that happens. But get past the anxiety. Darker says, no, this is a party. This is the time and place to be alive. Pots and pans are banging together in celebration. In all this excitement, I'm wondering where I've left my feet and why my hands are outside clapping. It's a party. And my message today is crash that party. We've been talking a lot about welcoming. And welcoming is a gathering in. It's a drawing in. We draw people into our space. And that requires openness, and it requires bravery, but there's still also an element of safety to it, because after all, we're in our space. I'm welcoming you into my space where I know the rules and I feel safe and I feel secure. So today I wanted to also talk about reversing that process. Yes, welcome people in, but also we need to be sending ourselves out. I suggest that we make a practice of putting ourselves in unfamiliar places, of letting our house fall to pieces and going to someplace unknown, physically, mentally, culturally. Learn just enough of a foreign language to communicate with a total stranger. Badly. Volunteer at a charity that serves an unfamiliar community. Visit a church where you're the minority. And come back here next time. If you don't already, listen to Al Jazeera America. Read the Indianapolis Reporter. Learn to appreciate rap music. Learn to appreciate country music. Put yourself in an unfamiliar place, because that's where we're all going. And we facilitate this in many different ways here at UUI, so I want to give a little bit of a shout out to that. Our youth go through a neighboring faiths program in part of their religious education, where they visit different religious communities all around the city. Right now, our youth and volunteer adults are actually volunteering to help serve food insecure people downtown at a soup kitchen, so that's a little bit outside their comfort zone maybe. And I don't think Ed Archer would forgive me if I failed to mention the volunteer work we do tutoring the children of refugees here in Indianapolis every Tuesday afternoon. And you can talk to Ed or talk to me if you would like more information about that, but it's a wonderful thing that we do. And the point of all of this is not to be a cultural tourist. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but that's not the point. The point is to deepen our capacity to engage with people, to learn to respond creatively to the unfamiliar by exposing ourselves to the unfamiliar, and to become more welcoming ourselves by putting ourselves in the position of being welcomed. That's a vulnerable place to be. And I think that we need to experience it from time to time if we want ourselves to be authentically welcoming people. We need to be vulnerable to letting someone else welcome us in. So change is coming. There's this wonderful multicultural party that's going on all around us in America. It's just getting started. It's been going on a long time, but it's also just getting started. And things are going to be jumping all night long. So let's not stay inside where it's safe and quiet. I invite you, let's crash that party. So speaking of unfamiliar things, we're going to close today with an unfamiliar hymn. Some of you may find it familiar, but it's been a while since we've done it. It's Wo Ya Ya, which is number 1020 New Zealand. And it was recorded by the British Afro-pop band Osibisa in the 70s. Also covered by Art Garfunkel as well. You may have heard that version. And the lyrics express both the uncertainty and the hope of the journey that we're all on together. Right? We are going, heaven knows where we are going, but we know within we will get there. Heaven knows how we will get there, but we know we will. And the word Wo Ya Ya doesn't mean anything. It's just an affirmation like, yeah, right on. So yeah, right on. Would you please rise in body or spirit for number 1020, Wo Ya Ya. We'll play it through one time, just the first part, so you can get the hang of it, and then we'll just jump right in.